sincerely hope you still have that coffee. So let's talk about the basic loop. The basic loop is a for loop. It may look a little intimidating at first, but trust me, the more and more you use this thing, the easier and easier it actually becomes. We have the form of a for loop. There's for this condition, do this. While this is true, do this. And this for statement takes an integer, so for int I, and I stands for index or iteration, and it could be anything. It could be for Mark, it could be for pizza, it could be anything you want. But let's just go with I. This is what you're going to typically see in textbooks and in documentation, so let's just stick with convention. So for I equals 0, I is, pick a number, less than 100. And let's go I plus plus. So this I plus plus means that it's going to add 1 to the value of I each time that this curly brace statement gets executed. So if I equals 0, I is going to equal 0 in the first iteration. Then it'll come back and add 1, and then test to make sure that I is less than 100, which if it's 1, it certainly is, especially for another 99. And then it will execute I equals 1, and then it'll print out and go back around for the loop, and it'll go to 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, all the way up to, well, you'll find out. So you see we got down to 99 and it did not do 100. Why? Because less than. If we had less than or equal to, and there we got 100. Now what if we wanted to have this go in the reverse as a countdown? Well, we would simply just start out at the highest value that we would like, and then we could say while I is greater than 0, and then we could do a decrement instead of an increment. And now we'll subtract 1 each time that this statement gets executed. And there we go. If we wanted to include 0, all we would have to do is say less than or equal to 0. Now, what is this good for? Well, it's good for an awful lot. And most especially, it is great for going through something like an array. An array is indexed, and an array, even though you can't see it, an array actually is a key value pair, where the key is 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, all the way through. So I can access a value in the array using the numerical key or the index for this array. So for instance, if I just said string array 3, I should get delta. And there it is. So now, if I wanted to display everything within the array, I could use a for loop. And I can use I again because I only exists within this context right here, which we call scope. So now I needs to be less than some value, otherwise it will just continue evaluating this statement or this loop forever. And that's something we definitely don't want to do, and it actually would not go forever. It would go until we have a Stack Overflow exception. So what we actually want to say is, hey, while I is less than the total length of this array, so the number of elements in this array, we want this thing to keep going until then. And since we have the index starting at 0, this is a safe thing to say. Remember when we did while I is less than 100 and it only evaluated to 99? Well, the same condition is exactly what we want to have here. So we can say string array dot, and we have, as soon as I hit dot, I have access to all of these methods and properties. Here are the properties, and here are the methods. And so one of the properties is called length, and that's the one I want. And if you click on this, you can see that it's going to get a 32-bit integer, which basically means it's an integer. It's a whole number, and it's going to represent the total number of elements in the array, and that's exactly what we want. So we can type in length and hit enter, and now we can just drop in our console.writeLine, and instead of hard coding this 3 value, we can just put in I. And just like in algebra class, I stands for whatever the value that was put in here, and I totally forgot this, I, and we'll say plus plus. And so now if we run this, it will display all of the values within each element within that array. And so there you go. The other way to go through an array, and this is kind of an easier version, I think, syntactically, meaning it's easier to read, it's a little easier on the eyes, is a for each loop. So let me type this thing out real quick, the for each loop, and then I'll explain. What this is saying is for each element of whatever type it is, as it comes out of this string array, print that element out. And what I mean by that is this var can literally be anything. We could be pulling an object out and it would say the element is an object. I could pull out an integer and it would be an integer. Var, it could be anything. It's a variable. And then once it is assigned in memory, it'll keep track of what type of variable that is. Or we could just say string. Since we know it's a string, we can say it's a string. And in fact, if we hover over this, we can see that it is a string array. So therefore, we know for a fact that it's going to be a string. But if you're not sure, or you just want to shorten up your code a little bit, make it a little prettier, then you can do that. But we'll go back to string. So there you go. We got the same exact result. So now let's talk about the while loop. And the while loop is, well, a way to create a loop based on whether or not a condition is true. We could replace this entire statement here with what it actually is evaluating to, which is true. So while true, say this. The only problem with this is that now here's a green squiggly line that says unreachable code detected, and that basically means that this loop will just continue to evaluate over and over and over again until the program dies. So we don't want to do that. Or if we did have a while true, then we need to have a condition that we know for a fact would be met at some point in time during the execution of our program so as to break out of that loop. And that's actually the term that we would use. Break. So I will show you this in use in a second. So before we run this, we just need to make sure that we decrement blast off. So we can say blast off minus minus, and let's run it. There we go. NASA would be proud. But what about this break statement? Well, if a condition is met, we could say if blast off is equal to 6, we can say that the launch was canceled, and then we can say break. And what break is, it's a keyword. We have actually 3 keywords that we can use in a while loop. We can use break, we could say return, which actually would just kick you out of the program, or continue. And continue would just kick us out of this iteration of the loop and bring us back up to iterate again. So a break will do this. So right at t minus 6, the launch was canceled, blast off, and then it kicked us out of the loop. So that's the power of break. So you want to have a condition, and even if we said while true, right? Ideally, this would just be an infinite loop. However, now that we have a condition that's met, it still prevents an infinite loop. Now, a do while is slightly different. A do while, do this while something is true. No matter what, the program will execute this statement in the do portion of the do while loop. So even if I said do this while something is false, right? It's still going to do this. This was written even when it was false. And so with a do while, it's important to remember that no matter what, at least one time this thing will occur, even if a condition is not met. What we could do is create a condition to test. So we can say bool keep going equals true, and then we can stick keep going in here. And we don't really need to add anything else. We could be explicit and say while keep going is equal to true. However, this is the exact same thing. If you're testing for whether or not something is true, then just having the variable in its place will be sufficient. Then we can create a counter, and we can initialize it to 0. And then in the do loop, we can do counter plus plus. And that will then immediately make the value of the counter 1. And then we can put in a condition. If counter is equal to 100, keep going equals false. And I actually want to see what iteration we're on. So I will do a console write line, and then I will say counter so that we can see it. I don't want to see this statement. And now let's see this in action. It stopped. And those are the different types of loops that are available, and with that power in mind, you can do quite a lot.